Enchaunter here, this week looking at the Underkeep Demo. This is a retro-inspired dungeon crawler under development by Ray Res, a surprisingly long-lived 3-person indie studio that's been around since the early 2000s. And I'll just come out and say it, they're doing a fantastic job mimicking the look and feel of something like Lands of Lore and some of the classic Dungeons & Dragons Gold box games, while making the experience a lot more approachable. Now that doesn't mean I think it's perfect, and we'll get to that over the video, but the demo showed a lot of potential, and going by this post from the developers, garnered a lot of useful feedback that they're taking into account for the full version, which is awesome to see. We first start the game by choosing between jumping right in with a preset party or taking our time to customize our own. It's a fairly straightforward process, especially compared to the obtuse AD&D rules of the 90s, and one that I recommend everyone go through, as the race and class descriptions really help set the mood for what's to come, especially when you find out there's apparently a Slugman race planned for the full version, which I'm particularly curious about. One thing the game doesn't seem to tell you about character creation is the fact that stats are random, as was the general custom with Western RPGs back then, and I'll be honest, I've never been a fan of that design decision. It can work great on a tabletop RPG, if you've got a group that's willing to actually roleplay instead of min-maxing their way through the dungeon, but on a video game, it just acts as an indirect difficulty modifier to the combat and leads players to waste time re-rolling their stats dozens of times until finally getting an acceptable result. So I would love it if we could use a points-buy system instead. Of course, you could argue that would favor a min-maxing approach, but the fact is that, unless a game accounts for suboptimal characters in some interesting way, like how the classic Fallout games significantly changed the play experience for low intelligence playthroughs, there's no reason not to min-max. A points-buy system would just make the process a lot less time-consuming, which is a good thing in my books. With party creation out of the way, we move on to the starting village where the local tavern keeper tasks us with a tutorial quest, one that unfortunately does not send us to the Underkeep, but rather to the surrounding forest for the rather unadventurous task of picking 5 mushrooms. As the game says, every descent begins with something small. I'll admit, this is a bit of a disappointing start. Plenty of great RPGs start with small, mundane tasks that later ramp up to more adventurous pursuits, but I can't help feeling like we're missing a bit of setup here. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, just a small hook that pulls us forward into the main plot. Maybe we'll get to that after gathering the mushrooms, but going by the contents of the demo, it just feels like the game's treating the dungeon delving as a foregone conclusion, rather than working up to a reason for our characters to risk their lives exploring the Underkeep in the first place. With that said, as you can see, the game looks beautiful. I cannot say this enough, these graphics and interface are so good at invoking the classic dungeon crawlers of the 90s, from the digital painting representing the starting village, to the forest tile set, the portraits, all the way through to the design choice of having a small viewport surrounded by interface elements. Everything, even the changes to the classic formula, really looks like what a 90s developer might have come up with had they access to today's hardware and tools. Underkeep is positively dripping with nostalgia, and that's by far its greatest asset, though I can see why someone who didn't grow up during that era might be put off by its overall appearance, considering how unapproachable the classics can feel at times. Thankfully, there are plenty of in-game tooltips and tutorials to help new players get started, so if you feel like dipping your toes into the genre, Underkeep has the potential to be a great starting point. The core game loop is rather straightforward. You move your party through the map from square to square, exploring and interacting with the environment while occasionally running into enemies. Despite the first-person perspective, this is a turn-based game, so there's no rush. You can stop and consider your options carefully, even in the middle of a fight. In battle, every actor gets a single action which they can use to either attack with their weapon or use a skill. Items can be used freely, but of course, you have a limited quantity of them. The 2 characters on the top row are our frontline fighters who take the brunt of the damage and attack with melee weapons, while characters in the bottom row stay at a safe distance, meaning they can't be attacked by melee enemies, but likewise can only use ranged weapons. That said, enemies can and will flank you if given the chance. You can rest to heal in between battles, but that requires food, which will run out very quickly if you try to use the classic strategy of resting after every single encounter. I do have a couple of points of feedback to make though. Enemies make noises when they get hit, but there's no visual feedback other than flashing for a split second, making combat feel less impactful than it would be. Of course, I have no idea on the finances behind this project, but I really feel like having some sort of hit reaction animation, even if it's just a single extra frame, would do wonders in that aspect. Second, the map is nicely detailed, but if possible, I'd love to be able to type my own notes on top of it, in the same way you would, for example, in Ultima Underworld. It might seem redundant considering there's a quest log and all, but I find there's always something I want to remember about this or that place, and having the ability to keep my notes inside my save file, where it will always be available even if I spend a few weeks away from the game, is much better than writing somewhere else and risk losing them. Other than that, gameplay works very well, sticking closely to the tried and true formula of the genre. In addition, Underkeep rewards paying attention to your surroundings and interacting with the environment. Items drop on the floor and have to be picked up individually, you unforge for flowers and berries, there are buttons to press, boxes, barrels and obstacles to destroy, heavy objects to move, and so on. I also saw a couple of simple puzzles, a secret area, and a bunch of class and race specific interactions which felt pretty good to discover. Overall, the entire experience acts as a proof that the developers understand proper dungeon crawling isn't just about fighting monsters, but rather about exploration and discovery. I did notice a lack of traps though, which is a bit of a shame because nothing makes a dungeon crawl tenser than having to be on your toes for signs of hidden pressure plates and other trap triggers, and there are few things more satisfying than using these traps against your enemies. In technical terms, well, Underkeep is so light it can probably run on any old potato, so I don't really see the need for quality options, but for me, it lacks a few other features that I think are pretty important. Now, anyone who's watched my videos knows I just love ultra-wide aspect ratio, so I can't avoid bringing it up, but one of the developers actually responded to a topic on the subject on the Steam forums, mentioning some of the difficulties in adapting their UI for a wider aspect ratio, and hey, fair enough. Something that I feel more strongly about in this case is the fact that this game really needs resolution options and a way to set a frame rate limit. Resolution options because there's no point in running it at full screen unless the game actually uses my full screen, which it doesn't, and as for the frame rate app, well, this thing is a nice start since it stops my computer from trying to melt itself while running Underkeep at 2000 FPS, but let's be honest, turn-based dungeon crawlers don't really benefit from running at 240 FPS either, so it would be nice to be able to limit to 60 and ease off on my power consumption. So to sum it all up, Underkeep has all the markings of a passion project. It's a game from a small independent team doing their best to recapture a very specific era of gaming, even going as far as replicating design choices made due to the hardware limitations of back then. As someone who spends a lot of time playing retro games, I respect that a lot, and I think the developers did a fantastic job on that front. But when it comes to RPGs, I tend to value the background setting and story a lot more than the gameplay and overall presentation, and the demo is a bit lacking in these aspects. I mean, having me pick mushrooms in a forest, while a perfectly fine excuse for a tutorial in a small self-contained area, doesn't really tell me anything about the main plot other than the fact that there will be a dungeon to explore and the game consists of exploring it. And I'm sorry, but that's literally every dungeon crawler ever. So here I am, sitting on the fence. There's a lot of care and attention put into Underkeep, and it shows, but there's also this massive gaping hole where I was expecting to find a narrative, which doesn't mean there isn't one, mind you, but doesn't make me confident about its content either. The one thing I'm feeling confident about after playing this demo is how Underkeep might become the perfect way of introducing new players to the genre. The way they managed to evoke the look and feel of the classics, making it more approachable without dumbing everything down, is an achievement in itself, so even if I'm not sure whether or not I might be interested in playing the full game, I can easily see myself gifting it to a few friends instead. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, feedback is appreciated. Bye bye!